The following video is a dissection of some of the mental health challenges and disparities faced by Indigenous peoples in Canada. Thank you for listening.
Hi, my name is Kathy. I'm here in front of one of many Toronto community housing buildings. Although these are very large buildings, but there's still lots of homeless people here. Here are some issues that was highlighted regarding Indigenous people. In 2021, over 1 in 6 Indigenous people, 17% live in crowded housing that was considered not suitable for the number of people who live here. Multiple generation households were most common living arrangement among First Nation people living in crowded housing, which make up to 34%, followed by 21% living with children. Among Métis living crowded housing, 1/4 were living in a household composed of couple living with children. Other common living arrangement among Métis include one parent's family, which make up 23%. Couple living with children make up 36%, while multiple generation household make up 35%. Come on, Canada, wake up. We can do better than this. If this was your family living in these conditions, what would you do and what would you want?
Thanks, Kathy. Many Indigenous communities are facing serious problems related to substance use. These issues are linked to the lasting effects of colonization, trauma from residential schools, and negative attitudes towards mental health. As a result, many Indigenous people experience cycles of addiction, mental health struggles, and discrimination. There is a strong need for substance use treatment that is fair and culturally relevant to Indigenous peoples. Untreated trauma has been handed down from one generation to the next, affecting the well-being of Indigenous youth, who are at 2 to 6 times greater risk for alcohol-related problems compared to non-Indigenous youth. Racism is also a major issue for many Indigenous individuals. A survey found that 38% of First Nations adults experienced racism in the past year alone, and about 63% said it hurt their self-esteem. Negative stereotypes paint a picture of Indigenous peoples as dependent on government support rather than capable individuals. The history of colonization and white supremacy has created these ongoing challenges for Indigenous communities. Unfortunately, harmful beliefs about Indigenous peoples continue to shape how society views them. However, there is hope, as awareness and education about these issues grow, leading to better responses. Research shows that Indigenous peoples have effective healing practices that can help with substance use issues. Successful treatment programs emphasize traditional values and spiritual practices. The best addiction treatment programs are those created by Indigenous people using First Nation values and approaches.
Thanks, Rodney. Today I will be covering the lack of goods and services going on in Indigenous communities and how these issues are showing signs of negative mental health impact in these communities. Many Indigenous communities suffer from the lack of goods and services, such as being limited to and not getting proper healthcare services, having a shortage of housing in the Indigenous community, leaving people homeless or house hopping, limited educational resources, such as students not having the resources they need in order to get the education they deserve, and most of all, the lack of mental health services. The lack of mental health services make it hard for Indigenous people to get the help they need in their communities. Having to go through a lack of goods and service in your own community is stressful in itself, and not having any mental health services would make things worse. This is a feeling of not having anyone to turn to while going through these brutal situations no one should go through in these little communities. Because of the lack of mental health services in these communities, the Indigenous people in these communities are turning to drugs, substance abuse, and addiction. I'm passing this on to my co-host Sierra, who will be going more into detail on these personal experiences in the Indigenous community.
Hello, this is Sierra, and I'm speaking to you live from Scarborough, Ontario with my very own auntie, my grandmother.
Hi, I'm Patricia Venegas. I am a grandmother, a daughter, a sister, a residential school survivor, second generation, and a proud Indigenous woman.
And today, I'm going to be asking you some questions, but before we get into that, I wanted to use one of our practices, which is smudging, just to kind of purify us before we get into these heavy topics. Okay, let's start then. The first question is, what are some of the challenges that you faced as a child, and how did you overcome those challenges?
I come from a family of 10 siblings. We grew up very poor. We only had the basics of life. We didn't grow up with love. We grew up with abuse, lots of anger, alcoholism, and it has gone into the generations from my children to my grandchildren. A lot of racism. I grew up with lots of racism. I grew up in a small town that was surrounded all by First Nations reserves, and the town was mostly white people. There was also a residential school not too far. Those students came. I mingled with them more than the white kids, because the white kids were racist, calling us Indians or saying we had lice. I grew up with a low self-esteem, no love for myself, no future that I could look up to as a positive thing. No guidance. I didn't have that kind of love to as a human being.
You mentioned how your mother is a survivor. How do you think that her time in a residential school impacted your view on self-esteem, mental health?
It affected me a lot because I never thought that I could be anything, because she was taught that I couldn't be nothing but a licey Indian kid. By leaving home at a young age, marrying someone that is not First Nations, he taught me about love. He taught me about living. He taught me about good things. He taught me about food, and we had 3 beautiful children. They took my mother from her home and forced her to go into the residential school, where she faced many obstacles: no food, abuse by the nuns and the priests, and there was nobody to turn to. She couldn't go home and visit, so she suffered. She didn't grow. And when she left when she was 16, she married right away. She married young. She was still a child. She suffered. She didn't grow.
That's a lot. Looking 7 generations back and 7 generations forward, how does the legacy of the residential school impact us?
It keeps going on. It's a cycle. From what I know, what I read, what I see, what I hear, there's still alcohol abuse, drug abuse, there's still sexual abuse, there's still all kind of abuses. This has come down from so many generations from the families. I know people that have been abused just like I was. Most of my generation have had alcoholic families, so I know it's a cycle that continues on, and you have to be a survivor to understand exactly what is going on. It's not what is written in the books. The books are written by white people. They're not written by First Nations people. And it doesn't matter how much the government gives the people, it's not going to erase the dirty history of the residential schools or for the First Nations people. I'm a survivor, and I will keep on going until it's my time to leave this earth.
Okay, thank you so much for that. It's very insightful. I appreciate it. I love you.
You should give me a cigarette.
We at this station call upon the federal government to provide sustainable funding for new and existing Indigenous healing centers to address the mental, physical, and spiritual harms caused by residential schools. We aim to ensure that provinces such as Nunavut and Yukon, and including Northwest Territories, are prioritized. This is our call to action. What is yours?